welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and I'm the apostle for the restoration of the original first century faith. And in this fourth part of Revelation Simplified, we want to talk about the democratic nature of the coming New World Order government and the role that democracy plays in holding the New World Order system together. So in previous sessions, we've been discussing the Revelation timeline, and what we've seen so far is that the first four seals, we've seen the releasing of a horse of a different color. And we've seen how these horses correspond each to a different one of the biblical patriarchs. At seal 5, we see where the dead call out for justice, and they're given a white robe and told to wait a little bit while longer. And then comes seal 6, there's a nuclear war, a conflict, or a conflagration of some point. And it will be, of course, centered on the land of Israel, but because the purpose is to bring the whole world into the Babylonian system, we expect that it will spill over into other nations as well. So just to recap, in Revelation 6 and verse 14, it tells us that then the sky, speaking of seal 6, it says, then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up. And most commentators tell us that this most likely, undoubtedly, refers to nuclear war and the mushroom clouds. Continuing in verse 14, it says, and every mountain, symbolic of governments, and every island, referring to national boundaries, was moved out of its place. And we can well imagine that if there, or when there will be a nuclear war, because we know it's coming, the people of the earth can be expected to clamor for a one world government to deliver them from the threat of any further nuclear conflicts. So when we take a look at Revelation, this list comes from Revelation chapter 17, and we'll see it again. But it is a series of 8, what we might call Egyptian or worldly empires that culminate in a Babylonian New World Order system, which is going to be sustained and run through democracy. And we'll explain why. The first of these empires was Egypt, and we know that Israel spent 430 years in hard bondage in Egypt, but it also refers in essence to Ishmael. We know Ishmael's mother Hagar came from Egypt, and Hagar also took a bride for Ishmael from Egypt. The second empire was Assyria, and as we see in other places, the Assyrians came into the land of Israel and they took captive the northern 10 tribes of Israel, effectively the sons of Joseph. These are also referred to as the kingdom, the northern kingdom of Ephraim, or the house of Ephraim. They're also called the house of Israel. And these were taken away into captivity before the domination of the Babylonian Empire. Now, if we take a look, Babylon shows up at number 3 in this list, and then the list proceeds forward to a Babylonian New World Order democracy. Now, what's so interesting is when we take a look at Daniel chapter 2, Babylon, instead of corresponding to point number 3, it corresponds to point number 1. But then we see still a progression towards effectively a New World Order democracy, and we're going to talk about that. So briefly to recap, but then to give other details and more information, in Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had a dream of a statue that was set up on the earth in 5 parts. The first 4 parts represented a series of 4 physical empires that would rule and reign over the land of Israel and over the known world at that time. Then the 5th empire would be a spiritual extension of the 4th empire, and we'll talk more about that. But since the head represented Babylon, what it means is that each and every one of these empires, each part of the statue, would be Babylonian in nature, and that means that they would manifest certain Babylonian spirits from the Babylonian pantheon. Now, we saw before where the rabbis went in, and we speak about this in more detail in the Nazarene Israel study, but we saw where the 2 remaining, or some say 3 remaining tribes in the southern kingdom of Judah were taken into exile in Babylon for failing to let the land rest. And this is where the rabbinical order was created, was in Babylon, and that's why we say the rabbinical order is still held captive in Babylon. The second empire was Medo-Persia, and Persia, of course, being Iran. The third empire was Alexander the Great's Macedonian or Greek Empire. What's so interesting about Alexander the Great is this is where the Greek philosophers are the ones who came up with the concept of democracy. The fourth empire was Rome, and Rome also practiced democracy at certain points, since they also were a Babylonian-style empire. One thing to know about Rome is that Emperor Constantine's cousin Diocletian split the administration of the empire into two parts. And these were known in that day as the eastern and the western legs of the Roman Empire. And as we get later on, we'll see how the eastern leg of the Roman Empire turned into the Byzantine Empire, and that's the forerunner of what we call the Eastern Bloc states, or the Eastern Christian states, Russia and the Slavic and the Baltic states. The western leg of the Roman Empire, which was headquartered or centered in Rome, that's where we get Roman Catholics and also the Protestants who broke away from the Roman Catholics. And what we're going to see is that here we have, in the fifth iteration, we have 2 feet of iron mixed with pockets of miry clay. And since we know the 2 legs of iron represent Rome, the 2 feet of iron mixed with clay have to represent Rome plus something else. And as we'll see later on in this video, that something else is Islam. But once again, it's still Babylonian. It's still Roman in nature. So we want to take a look at this word for democracy so we can understand how it applies to Babylon and the New World Order. So we take a look at this term democracy. It comes from Latin, which is a Roman language. The word is demokratia, which I don't know how you pronounce it. I don't speak Latin. I also don't speak Greek. But the Latin word demokratia comes from the Greek, also demokratia, and it means effectively people power. So anytime we see, whether it's the Democratic Party or socialists or communists, and they're calling for power to the people, we know that this is a red horse form of a spirit. So just to recap, here's some things that we know about red horse Esau. We know that Esau despised his birthright, that he didn't want to do things Yahweh's way. He wanted to do things his own way. But as we're going to see, Esau still wants to pretend as if he's in Elohim's favor. So the color red refers to the bonds of blood. And in other words, so the red horse, they're always referring to our common humanity. They're not referring up toward Elohim, toward Yahweh, but they're referring to our common humanity. And from this, we get the concepts of humanism, socialism, and democracy, and other people-isms. And as we're going to see, that this is the concept upon which both a united religion and a united nations, this is what they're based on. This is what they're built upon. So we take a look at this term Babylon in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, and we come up with Strong's Old Testament 894, which is Bavel, and it means effectively confusion. And this is basically what we have in democratic systems, is we have confusion. Because instead of there being one leader, there's a multiplicity of leadership. So now let's take a look at this word further. Hebrew is an amazing language, and many people believe that in Hebrew, it's both alphabetic and pictographic. So the words are put together by the letters of the alphabet, but each letter of the alphabet also has a symbolic meaning, much like the Egyptian hieroglyphs or Chinese pictographs and this sort of a thing. So reading from right to left, the letter bet means house. And then we have a second bet, meaning another house. And the word lamed, which is a symbol of a goad, refers to authority. And so what we get then is this is a perfect picture of democracy, in which case we have more than one house. For example, in America, we have the House and the Senate, and then we have the White House, the presidency. So we have more than one center of power. So we have a division of power and fighting over power, and everyone wanting to infuse what is their own will, what is it that they want. And people aren't necessarily looking toward Elohim as our creator. And there's circumstances where they are, but not in every case. And this is what Yeshua speaks of when he's talking in Mark chapter 3 and verse 24. He says, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And this is, in fact, part of the New World Order plan for the reduction of the population worldwide. One of their goals, they want to bring Earth's population down by some 93% or something like that. And this is one of the effective means to do it, is to cause the people to be fragmented by getting to follow a democratic red horse system. Scripture doesn't speak in favor of us doing things that are right in our own eyes, which is effectively what democracy calls for. For example, in Judges chapter 17 and verse 6, it tells us that in those days there was no king in Israel, and that everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And in the book Torah Government, we talk about the progression, how we got from the Garden of Eden then to a kingship, and why kingship, or at least hereditary leadership, is so important. So we don't have kings right now in the Judeo-Christian world, but as we'll see in other places, we're going back under hereditary leadership because there's an important role for that hereditary leader to play. And one of the roles that's so important for that hereditary leader to play is to counter the effect that's mentioned in Proverbs 14 and verse 12. It says, "There's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." And again, this may seem like a difficult point for many people to understand, because a lot of people, and you see this all the time on the internet and various commentators, a lot of very well-meaning Christians, and but they're always pointing to the Constitution, which they consider to be a biblical document, and it's not a biblical document. In fact, as we'll see later on in later parts of this video series, democracy is the reason the Illuminati, the reason the occult world celebrates democracy, is it's when people broke free of looking to Elohim's word for leadership, and now they're looking toward their own word, their own authority. So there was a fundamental shift that went on. And one of the problems with red horse democracy is that it effectively panders to the least common denominator. And so the least common denominator is always what's good for the flesh. So this is where we end up with one red horse nation declaring war on other nations and this sort of a thing, which again is why in Revelation chapter 6 and verse 4, just to recap, when we first meet the red horse, it says, Revelation 6 and verse 4, "Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take the leadership, to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to them a great sword." And this is effectively what happens, is when people are focused on the red horse, they're focused on the common bonds of blood. They're focused on the will of the people, as if that's the same thing as the will of Elohim, and it's not. So just to compare, we want to introduce a new concept in. So if the red horse symbolizes Esau and Catholicism and also socialism, we want to introduce a concept called the pink horse. And this is effectively white horse Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh, the children of Joseph who still behave like the red horse. So you say, well, what is it that we're talking about? And so how many Christians do we know who are practicing red horse democracy? And how did we get to be in this place? Well, as we show in the Nazarene Israel study and other places, in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 25, it says, "Then the saints," referring to the white horse, "shall be given into his hand," or into the papacy's hand, "for a time and times and half a time." And this corresponded to the 1260 years when the Roman Church doctrine began to come together, and the Protestant Reformation of 1517, and it effectively carried on for well over a century after that. But what we're saying here is there were some 1260 years during which the white horse, Ephraim, sojourned with Rome. And one of the things is that the white horse picked up a lot of the practices and tendencies of Rome during this time. So this is how, again, this is not in the book of Revelation, but it's a concept that we use to explain the pink horse. This is to explain how it is that we have Joseph and his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who in their hearts, they're white horse. In their hearts, they're pointing to the Bible. In their hearts, they're pointing to Yeshua, but they're also pointing to the Constitution. They're also pointing to 1776. They're also pointing back to the Revolutionary War and this kind of a thing. And so what we need to understand about this is that the pink horse is effectively a work in progress. So while the white horse was sojourning with red horse Esau in Rome, he picked up various doctrines of Rome. And the key thing to understand is about these doctrines. So he's got some anti-Torah doctrines. He also keeps the wrong days of worship, Sunday, Christmas, Easter, this kind of thing. He calls Yahweh by the wrong names, calls Yahweh Lord and God. And he also tends to practice democracy. So these are characteristics. You can't really call him the white horse, because we're going to see in just a moment, because he keeps the wrong doctrines. He keeps the doctrines of Esau. He keeps the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. So if we come here to Matthew chapter 16 and verse 12, so Yeshua is speaking with the disciples, and he's speaking with them, and then the disciples understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So we know that leaven represents sin, and we know that there's different kinds of doctrine. Some doctrines are accurate, and most doctrines are not accurate. Most doctrines are sinful. And Yeshua was warning them against the black horse doctrines of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So do they also need to take care against the white horse doctrines of Esau in Rome? Now notice what's coming up. So in Matthew 13 and verse 33, so Yeshua spoke another parable to them. And Yeshua said, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, and we know leaven is symbolic of sin, which a woman, in this case Babylon, took and hid in 3 measures of meal till all was leavened. And you say, well, what could that mean? Well, we know that meal is effectively ground seed. And so when we're talking about seed, we're talking about the seed of Abraham. And so who is it that we're talking about when we talk about the seed of Abraham? We're talking about the patriarchs. We're talking about Ishmael, Esau, Judah, and Joseph. So what we see here then is that we're not really talking about Joseph. We are talking about Joseph, but we're not talking about Joseph in his purest form. So we have Judah, who's the black horse. He's in the head. We have Ishmael, and he's down near the feet. He's the green horse with the clay. And then there's Christianity, the sons of Joseph, and that's the pink horse, because he's still observing democracy, and he's again in the feet of the statue. But the thing that ties them all together is red horse Esau in Rome and the practice of democracy. That's what holds the New World Order together. And again, I don't mean to say in that slide that Ishmael is one of the feet and Joseph is another one of the feet. Joseph is both of the feet infused with pockets of Islamic clay. But I'm just trying to show the relationship here, and we're going to see how this plays out in just a moment. But if we take a look at the government systems by horse, and this is a very important point. If you don't get anything else from this presentation, I want you to understand this. When we take a look at the systems of government by horse or by the patriarch, what we see is that there's the 3 horses that correspond to the 3 patriarchs that Yeshua is talking about here. So we have the white horse, which symbolizes Yeshua's people, Joseph, Manasseh, Ephraim, and they are supposed to be following a Melchizedekian order. And that's how they walk out the Torah. And we'll talk about this when we get to the Torah government study. But there's actually and so most people find this to be a mind-boggling thing, that Yeshua actually has a program for us to be doing. Yeshua has a program for us to fulfill. And the Great Commission is not supposed to be this disordered, disorganized thing, but it's an ordered thing. And we're attempting to build a theocracy. We're attempting to build a world system of governance that's going to take off after Trumpet 7. There's also, the second one is the black horse Judah has a theocratic system that they call Torah law. Now, this isn't the same as the Torah, but this is a rabbinic system that they follow that was created in Babylon, where they begin with the Torah and then they modify it with all their man-made traditions and teachings and fence laws. So, but nonetheless, it is still a theocratic system, even if democracy is practiced in the land of Israel up until Trumpet 7. Then we have the green horse, Ishmael, and he practices Sharia law, which again is a theocratic system. Now notice, if you get nothing else, notice how these three theocratic systems, the Melchizedekian order and Torah, then Torah law, and then Sharia law, those are theocratic. Those are the three measures of Abrahamic meal or ground seed that Yeshua is referring to. Then we have the two others. Then we have red horse Esau, but Esau despised his inheritance. Esau despised the kingship. So instead, Esau practices what we call Roman or Greco-Roman democracy. And he also practices Catholicism. Now, what's so interesting about this, let's take a look. This is basically Esau's bid for power. So in democracy, effectively what it is a power sharing strategy. So because men hate to submit. So instead of submitting to Yahweh's anointed leadership, now everyone casts their vote for whom they want to see. They cast their vote for whichever candidate seems good and right in their eyes. And this effectively leads to gang warfare, you might call it. Whereas it's mob rule, where one mob declares war against the other mob. But it's very effective in terms of gaining buy-in and garnering buy-in by the people, because it's effectively a strategy where everyone gets to be king, even though it causes a house to be divided against itself. Then they also have their form of worship, which is Catholicism. And as we see in other places and show in the Nazarene Israel study, the term Catholicism literally means universalism. So once again, the purpose is to create a broad, easy road to make things easy for people. So it's easy to get people to buy into the government system. It's easy to get people to buy into the religious system, but there's a separation between the church and the state. Now, this also reflects in the pink horse. So here we have pink horse Joseph, or whether he's Ephraim or whether he's Manasseh. They're typically practicing a form of Greco-Roman democracy, and then they have whatever it is that their church is. For example, the Russians have the Russian Orthodox Church, or the Slavic states have the Eastern Orthodox Church. And we have basically Protestantism here in America and also in the ex-British Empire. And it's so important to understand that these things are not of Yahweh. These things are not what the renewed covenant commands. So those of us who are called out early, and most people will not understand what's going on until after Armageddon, but we're going to begin to build slowly as time goes on. So for those of us who understand this teaching, let's take a look at the correspondence between these three measures of meal, these three measures of Abrahamic theocratic seed that are tied together by red horse Esau Roman democracy and the statue of Babylon. The correspondence is 1-to-1. So here we have Judah is in the head, or he's in the head of gold. So that's why the Jews effectively, and notice that they do very well financially speaking, and that's very important for them because, as we'll see in a moment, the black horse is able to control the red horse through means of money. Then we also see the red horse Esau Roman government, and that corresponds basically to Greece and Rome. It's the glue that connects everything together. And then we have the 2 feet of the statue. And again, I don't mean to say that one foot is pink horse Christian and one horse is Islam. It's not correct. Both of the feet are Christian, but they have pockets of Islamic clay mixed within them. So what this shows us is that once democracy is introduced during the Greek Empire, it continues on during the Roman Empire, and then it takes off during the Christian phase after the Roman-style kingships have fallen away. And so in this way, democracy becomes a very central role. It's a central element because it appeals effectively to the majority of everyone. And notice how this corresponds. I'm attempting here in this slide, I hope it's understandable. I'm attempting to depict the capstone of this New World Order pyramid. Now, this is the second beast, and we're going to talk about the first and second beasts more when we get to Revelation chapters 13 and 17 and 18. But notice on the top, we have the black horse, the money power, basically, the head of gold in Babylon. And this refers not only to the synagogue of Satan and the money powers that be in the city of London, but it also refers to the rabbinic control of the coming United Religions Initiative. We'll talk more about that in future segments. Then notice we have the red horse, which is effectively the democratic governments that everyone keeps electing. And that's going to be the United Nations and the United Religions Initiative. And we're going to see that the black horse is able to control the red horse by means of money. We see that every day. And by the way, if you want to come to the Nazarene Israel website and sign up for the newsletter, we show how these things, we show how the news fits into these categories week by week. But there's also what they call deep state control of the media, the courts, and the schools. And the purpose of this is to rule over the common people, because after all, the Babylonian system is an elitist system. It's not here to serve the people, it's here to rule over the people. But then at the bottom of this pyramid, what we see is that the white horse, or actually in this case, the pink horse, and also the red horse Catholics and the green horse, and all other religions, they get forced together. And this is what the rabbis, the Babylonian rabbis, refer to as the Noahides. And just some things to see and understand about this is that the black horse controls the red horse, typically by means of money. And the red horse favors the green horse because, after all, Esau intermarried with Ishmael. And one of the most important things is that the pink horse submits to the red horse because they're both, at present, they're both focused on the democratic principle. And this is the reason, one of the purposes of these end times is to help the white horse break free the rest of the way from the red horse. Or we might still say that the Protestant Reformation is still in motion. It's still taking place. And although most of the Protestants might be headed the wrong way, what we're going to see is that the end of Armageddon, the red horse will be destroyed and the white horse will be pure white again. And that's when the kingdom will be given to the saints. So this is something very important. We're going to talk a lot more about that. But this is something very important that we all need to be working toward, is building this white horse Melchizedekian order that's going to be handed off to our children. But as a result of this, earlier we saw that every island, every mountain and every island, meaning every government and every national border, would be moved out of their places. Well, this is a depiction, this is an image map created by what's called the Club of Rome. And again, Esau dwells in Rome. This is what's called the 10 planned supernations for a democratic New World Order system. And notice the role that democracy plays. For example, in supernation, what's called supernation number 1, in the upper left, which is Canada, and then also the United States, and also Mexico, supernation number 1, they're working toward this slowly. This is what they're working towards in terms of the North American Free Trade Agreement. But once we hit the sky receding like a scroll of Seal 6, we expect these things to greatly accelerate. And then chapter 7 earlier was an inset chapter, and then the timeline picks back up again in Revelation chapter 8, starting in verse 1, and it tells us that when the Lamb, or when Yeshua, opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. And as we already saw, that represents a period of 20 years and 10 months. And this is the period of time during which the New World Order will rise to power. So if we take a look again at the timeline, we have the releasing of the horse force, second line down, the 7 seals. We have the releasing of the horse forces, the dead cry out. Then we have a nuclear conflict, and then the sealing of the 144,000, which takes place. That's chapter 7, it's an inset chapter. And then seal 7 is the half hour of silence in heaven. And seal 7 then opens the way for the trumpets. So if you'll join me again in part 5 of this video series, we're going to talk about the trumpets. If you want more information, or if you'd like to sign up for our free weekly newsletter, please join me at www.nazarene-israel.com. NazareneIsrael.org. Shalom.